Welcome to Buckingham's training on Form CRS. I'm Jake Fector, Buckingham's Compliance Manager. The Form CRS, or Client Relationship Summary, is part of the SEC's Regulation Best Interest that was introduced in 2019 and is now becoming final rule on June 30th, 2020. Before we dig into this presentation, I want to first thank a few folks who have been extremely helpful in getting Buckingham prepared to implement the Form CRS. First is the client experience team, specifically Rob Ziliak and Aaron Gray. Next is the Buckingham Operating Committee and the OMO group. Next is the Salesforce and Project Management team, Lindsay Gerard, Liz Hughes, and Ben Sinclair, who have all done a ton of work to build out some workflows in Agreement Express and Salesforce. Finally is our compliance team, especially Sal Papa and Amanda Robinson, who are helping present on this webcast. Let's go ahead and dive right in with an overview of our agenda. This presentation is going to focus on 4 different areas. First is an overview of the Regulation Best Interest and Form CRS. Next is a structure of the Form CRS document itself, followed by the Form CRS conversation starters, which is going to be a big training point for our advisory staff. Finally, we'll wrap up with delivery requirements of the document itself. With that in mind, I'll hand it over to Sal Papa to provide us with an overview and background of the Regulation Best Interest and Form CRS.
Thanks, Jake, and a special thank you to you personally for leading our efforts in preparing for and coming into compliance with the requirements of the new Form CRS. We want to spend a little bit of time on talking about Regulation Best Interest, or Reg BI, and Form CRS. Certainly, you could provide a full-day seminar just on Regulation BI or on Form CRS itself, but we don't have that luxury of time, and I'm not sure you'd want to sit through that entire thing. But we still thought it would be helpful to provide some high-level comments. So if we go to the next slide, and you rewind to June of 2019, the SEC adopted a 4-part package of rulemakings and interpretations. And the 4-part package included Regulation Best Interest, which sets forth the new standard of conduct for broker-dealers. The new Form CRS, which is a relationship summary in the broker-dealer realm, or also referred to as Form ADV Part 3 for investment advisors. And then 2 separate interpretations under the Investment Advisors Act, one of which I would highlight specifically, which is entitled Commission Interpretation Regarding Standard of Conduct for Investment Advisors. And essentially, it's an interpretation of the fiduciary duty that applies to registered investment advisors and ultimately reaffirms that advisors have a fiduciary duty comprised of a duty of care and duty of loyalty to their clients. Now, when you look at this 4-part package of rulemakings and interpretations, individually and collectively, the actions were designed to enhance and clarify the standards of conduct applicable to broker-dealers and investment advisors, and then help retail investors better understand and compare the services offered and also help them to make an informed choice. Ultimately, the package of materials was designed to provide greater consistency in the level of protections provided under each regime, but I think the jury's still out whether or not those same level of protections exist. So if we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what has changed and what has not changed for our purposes, we provided a high-level summary here. First is standards of conduct. Well, for broker-dealers, of course, it establishes a new best interest standard of care for broker-dealers and their associated persons when making a recommendation to a retail customer of any securities transaction or investment strategy involving securities, including the recommendations of the types of accounts. For advisors, there is no specific new rule, and we still continue to follow the fiduciary standard of care, but we did receive some clarification on some aspects of existing obligations, including the concept or requirement that their fiduciary duty is required when making a recommendation of a rollover or on switching the type of account. And of course, if you go back to the DOL fiduciary rule, there's a consistent theme there. And then secondly, some additional guidance as it relates to financial planning and advisors formulating a financial plan and making sure that they obtain additional information from the client, such as income and investments, marital status, tax status, insurance policies, financial goals, all consistent with our framework of providing financial planning and design, build, and protect, and things that we've been doing throughout history. Secondly, you have this new disclosure obligation, and that's the relationship summary for broker-dealers or Form ADV Part 3 for investment advisors. And then lastly, new compliance obligations. For broker-dealers, of course, it's new policy and procedures to ensure that they achieve compliance with Reg BI and these new standards of conduct. And then for investment advisors, while not a new rule, of course, we have to adopt policies and procedures to ensure compliance with Form CRS. So if you go to the next slide and we talk about Form CRS itself, it's essentially a document that's designed to assist the retail client with the process of deciding whether to establish an advisory account, engage a particular firm or financial professional, or to terminate or switch a relationship or specific service. The compliance deadline is June 30th of this year, of 2020, and the form itself, interestingly, is strictly limited to 2 pages, and it has very strict requirements around headings, around the informational language that must be included, and when you add all of those things up, it actually takes up the majority of the 2-page limit. It's also designed to be written in plain English, with short sentences, with everyday words, and really you're supposed to avoid any sort of technical jargon. One of the more interesting, I think, things about the Form CRS is these conversation starters. Now, the conversation starters are a series of questions that must be included within the Form CRS, and while the questions don't need to be answered in the Form CRS itself, and as a matter of fact, you probably couldn't with the space limitations, it's intended to or designed to help the retail investor form questions for themselves to better understand the professional that they may be hiring, the services they may be receiving, the fees that they would be paying, and the qualifications of the advisor, the financial advisor. Certainly, if a client is shopping around for services, these conversations are designed to provide a script that they can utilize in performing the due diligence of various providers. And hopefully, as we go through this presentation, you'll see the Form CRS as an opportunity to continue to distinguish ourselves from other industry participants out there and the fiduciary obligations that we always have and continue to provide to our clients. Now, Jake is going to dive a little bit into the content of the form itself, have a discussion on these conversation starters, and then talk about our delivery obligations of this new Form CRS, including how we will satisfy those delivery obligations. So thank you, and Jake, over to you.
Thanks, Sal. On these next few slides, I'm going to review the structure of the Form CRS with Amanda Robinson. Amanda?
The Form CRS, or Client Relationship Summary, is also coined as ADV Part 3 in the industry and is broken down into 5 items. Item 1, Introduction. Item 2, Relationships and Services. Item 3, Fees, Costs, Conflicts, and Standard of Conduct. Item 4, Disciplinary History. Item 5, Additional Information. As part of the rule proposal of Form CRS, the SEC required that firms use very prescribed and standard wording across the entire document. The main reason behind this was to try to create a fair representation across broker-dealers and registered investment advisors so that prospects or investors can easily evaluate firms on the same playing field. The document itself follows a basic Q&A format where firms must answer a series of questions related to the areas covered above. The Form CRS also includes conversation starters, which would serve as jumping off points for possible questions that a prospect or a client may ask their advisor. Firms should not answer these questions on the document since the answer often is specific to a client's needs, but also because there is a specific 2-page limit to the Form CRS document, making it difficult to provide any sort of detailed response. The 2-page limit is required by rule. The SEC even goes so far as to recommend the font size, margins, and layout of the document itself, which does 2 things. 1, it drives to create a uniform document across all advisors, and 2, it makes it really difficult to add any other context than the already prescribed and set language that the SEC requires firms to use.
I do also want to mention that the Form CRS document only needs to be delivered to what the SEC has coined as a retail investor. When thinking about our business model, that is any household, any family, they've sort of broken it down in rule interpretation and FAQs from the industry to say any human investor you have needs to receive this form. Let's think about other parts of our business that may not be impacted or may not need to receive this document, right? Things like our retirement plans that we may service, or those institutional clients we have. Again, those aren't, think about the retail investor side of this, those aren't human investors. So they do not fall under the scrutiny of Form CRS and do not need to receive this form.
So with that in mind, let's jump in and take a look at Buckingham Strategic Wealth's Form CRS. Here you can see our introduction, what investment services and advice we can provide, what fees are associated with these services, what our legal obligations are as investment advisors, how we make money, and what conflicts of interest we have. It is important to note that the answers to a lot of these questions is dictated by the pre-existing disclosures we have to clients by way of the Form ADV Part 1 and Form ADV Part 2. By nature of checking certain boxes on our Part 1 or stating a certain conflict on the Part 2, those items are pulled through in the required language of Form CRS. Here we see a continuation of BSW's Form CRS, including how our financial professionals make money, a discussion of any legal or disciplinary history that our financial professionals may have, and where to go for additional information.
So first item is the introduction. Very basic information here, which states that Buckingham Strategic Wealth is a registered investment advisor. The SEC also requires both BDs and RIAs to state that, right, there are differences in the services offered by different types of advisors, and it's important for both prospects and clients to be aware of those differences, and that's what we try to highlight in this type of a document. At the end of this introduction, again, you'll see this throughout the form, the SEC is really encouraging firms, investors, and prospects to use some of their publicly available tools to search the information about a firm or the information about an end advisor, right? By looking up things like their U4 or their IPD history. All of that's publicly available, and the SEC is really encouraging prospects to look into that information. On item 2 here, we talk about, right, the services we offer to retail investors. We offer wealth management services that come in a wide variety of items. In this section, we spell out our normal investment advisor agreement structure, right? 99% of the clients we have do have a discretionary agreement, right, through the investment advisor agreement we sign with them. We also get our first introduction to the conversation starters, which we're going to get to in a little bit later of this presentation, but you'll see those on the screen here, right? We're encouraging a prospect or a client to ask us questions to better understand our service offering. Again, to go with the theme of hyperlinking and making this a rather smart document, we also have the ability to outsource or to say, hey, here's a hyperlink to additional disclosures that you'll find in our ADV Part 2, right? The Form CRS is a very brief and short description of our disclosures, whereas the Part 2 really is an all-inclusive disclosure document. The SEC encourages firms to hyperlink to specific sections, and that's what we do here. In a lot of areas throughout the Form CRS, we provide really the highest level of details and then frequently try to tie back to the ADV Part 2A. For item 3 here, next talking about fees and cost and conflicts of interest and standard of conduct. This is the longest portion of the Form CRS document. It makes up about one of the 2 pages that we display to our prospects and clients. When thinking about fees, right, in almost all cases, we bill quarterly in advance. We do say that there's different ways that we may charge clients. There's also different types of fees other than just the management fees we're charging, right? Thinking about other investment fees, any other type of custodian fees that may come along with, or fund fees. All of that needs to be disclosed here as well. Another part of item 3 is thinking about all of the conflicts we have and the standard of conduct we need to hold ourselves to. Here is, as Sal mentioned earlier in the presentation, really an opportunity for Buckingham to differentiate themselves. Reviewing this section is likely the easiest way for a prospect or a client to differentiate between advisors on the Form CRS, because this is, right, where an advisor needs to talk about all of their conflicts and the standards of conduct that they hold themselves to. If a firm is an RIA like Buckingham, we can clearly state here that, right, we have to act in your best interest. We are fiduciaries through and through. That is what we are inherently held to, and we sort of, again, can shout that from the rooftops here. Whereas when you think about a broker-dealer or another type of advisor, they don't have the ability to state that in this section. So again, here is a nice way that we can differentiate our services and really make sure that clients and prospects are aware that we are fiduciary and we try our best to either mitigate or solve all types of conflicts. That being said, right, we do have conflicts as an advisor. Even though we are fiduciaries, we still have conflicts that we need to disclose and make investors aware of. Some of these which we need to outline here, right? We have solicitor or referral programs to where there may be incentives for either an end third party or someone internally to receive some type of referral fee when a prospect is converted to a client. Moving on to some of the next questions asked under item 3 here. Here is where Buckingham needs to disclose that we also have affiliated entities, right? We're unique in that we do have a separate registered investment advisor that is our affiliated entity, right? Buckingham Strategic Partners, Legacy BAM, and Loring Ward. That information, because we do have an affiliated firm, needs to be disclosed here. We also do have an affiliated business and businesses through our parent company, Focus Financial Partners. On our ADV Part 1, there's a specific section that asks each advisor to sort of check the box on the different types of advisors that an affiliated business may work with. So again, thinking about the Focus Financial Partnership, there's roughly 60 partner firms, some of which have a different business model than Buckingham, right? Some of them are broker-dealers. Some of them work as a municipal securities dealer. You'll see that, again, by nature of us checking the box or disclosing something on our Part 1, all of those different types of affiliated businesses need to be displayed here. I can likely anticipate that this is where advisors in the field might get questions, right? You might be asked by a prospect or a client to say, hey, I see here that you have an affiliated business that is a broker-dealer. That doesn't quite make sense to me because you just told me on the slide before that you're a fiduciary. It does take some explaining to say, look, this affiliation is actually a step removed, if you will. It's through our parent company, Focus Financial Partners. Within the partnership of those firms, yes, there are firms that do serve as a broker-dealer or a municipal securities dealer or some other type of advisor. Yes, we're required to disclose that to you, but our core business model, right, who we are and how we need to act towards you still is as a registered investment advisor who is a fiduciary who has to put your best interest in mind. So again, just wanted to preview that because that's likely going to come up as a frequently asked question that you may get from a client. The last section under item 3 right? How do professionals make money? So this one's pretty straightforward in that our advisors who serve as clients receive some type of base salary with a discretionary bonus based on both individual and firm performance. Item 4 talks about disciplinary history. And I do want to spend a little bit of extra time on this slide as well, because the one question firms have to answer in a yes or no format is, do you or your professionals have any type of legal or disciplinary history? And we have to answer that as yes. So Buckingham does have 6 advisors with some type of disclosure event on their Form U4. So again, that's also being aggregated into this Form CRS document that we have to look at each of our investment advisor reps U4 and report back if any disciplinary history or legal issues have been filed. And so while we run a large scale advisory business with over 225 investment advisor reps, we do still have a small number that actually triggers us to answer this question as yes. Now, giving some additional context and background here I think is helpful, and we try to do that in the second and third sentences here to say, look, all of these events for these advisors, these disclosure events, occurred well before they joined Buckingham. And actually most of them came as a result of some of the transactions we've been doing. Technically, these events are still disclosed on their Form U4 and need to be described herein. The last section, again, wrapping up each of the items here when talking about additional information, we do have to link to other documents. I mentioned our Part 2A. We also link to Buckingham Strategic Partners Form CRS at the end of this document. Again, trying to connect the dots to say, if someone gets this 2-page Form CRS, it can serve as a jumping off point to research not only Buckingham's documents like our 2A, but also things like someone's investment advisor profile online or our affiliates Form CRS, trying to make this as sort of fluid as a digital document as we can here to make things easy for a prospect or a client. We will now discuss the recommended strategies to answer any of the Form CRS conversation starters. In general, we have 3 points to our guidance to advisors. First is to utilize the template responses made available on the Buckingham Beat. The compliance team worked with the client experience group to create template language to help answer each question. Second is to have advisors draw upon other firm resources and white papers. We will make those white papers and other publicly available resources and guides available on the Resources tab to help add depth and clarity to your answers. Finally, we want advisors to combine these items above with their own voice and experience. Advisors know that answers may differ greatly depending on the prospect or the client. This is where you as the advisor are recommended to add your own voice to answer these questions. The end result we are hoping for in answering any of these conversation starters is a clear and articulate response that combines some firm-approved language with additional insight from each individual advisor. With that, let's look at our first conversation starter, which asks, given my financial situation, should I choose an investment advisory service? Why or why not? Now, when we're asked this question from a prospect or a client, hopefully every time our answer begins with a yes. Here's where we would like advisors to explain why they believe that someone becoming a client and working with Buckingham will ultimately help the client achieve their goals. Other helpful resources here can be documents like, is Buckingham right for you? Again, we will house these template responses and other resources on the Beat compliance page, so advisors will always have a starting point as they craft their response back to clients. The second conversation starter asks, how will you choose investments to recommend to me? We try to answer this question by outlining the 5 steps to our investment process that is located in the investment policy statement and the investment strategy manual. Again, you see these 5 different steps on the screen here, but maybe there's an opportunity, depending on the prospect or the client's background, to bring in additional subject matter sheets that we have available. Things like a focus on alternative investments, or how we build efficient tax strategies, or how we think about IRA and Roth conversions. Again, we're trying to give each advisor a starting point to build upon their response. The third Form CRS conversation starter asks, what is your relevant experience, including your licenses, education, and other qualifications? And what do these qualifications mean? In our template response here, we mentioned that the ADV brochure supplement of the ADV or the ADV Part 2B. This is the section of the ADV that includes the profiles of the advisors that a prospect or a client may ultimately work with. Advisors can always find the most recent version of the ADV for their office on the Resources tab, the Compliance Shared Drive, or on the Beat. We will also have additional information that can be shared to some of our more common professional designations like the CFP or the CFA. The fourth Form CRS conversation starter asks, help me understand how these fees and costs might affect my investments. If I give you $10,000 to invest, how much will go to fees and costs, and how much will be invested for me? This conversation starter is really interesting in that we are asked to comment on an investment of $10,000, which is almost never the case for an initial investment for our clients. We have a minimum fee requirements, which lead to a minimum account size, but the SEC still requires advisors to answer these questions regardless of their business structure. As such, we have a few different options to help advisors answer this question. In some of our language, we reference our normal fee schedule, how fees are debited each quarter, and tie back to our design, build, and protect principles. On this next slide, we actually go through a specific example, talking about our fee schedule, some of the other trading and fees associated with accounts, and what ultimately might be invested of that $10,000 for a client. But again, after discussing with a few advisors and the client experience team, something like fees is a question that often comes up from a prospect or a client. So, in some degree, trust your instincts, use what's already in your toolkit, accurately answer this question. Conversation starter number 5 asks, how might your conflicts of interest affect me? And how will you address them? When our team thinks about mitigating risk or thinking through conflicts of interest, there's 3 decisions we go through. First is, can we disclose the conflict? We have core compliance documents like the Form ADV, our wealth advisory agreement, our privacy notices that can build upon the disclosures that we need to have to potentially talk through and outline a conflict of interest that a client might see. Secondly is managing the conflict of interest. The firm has a formal ethics and compliance program that all of our associates must adhere to. Examples of this can be advisors disclosing an outside business activity, or thinking through what types of referral programs we may have with our custodians. Again, all different types of conflicts that we both disclose and in this case, try to manage on a day-to-day basis. But ultimately, we may come to the decision that the conflict is simply too much for the firm to take on, and we eliminate the conflict by saying no. Again, as a fiduciary advisor, we're always striving to put our client's best interest forward. And so ultimately, if the risk is too much, we can mitigate a conflict by simply saying no. The 6th question asks, as a financial professional, do you have any disciplinary history? And if so, for what type of conduct? As I previewed earlier in this presentation, we do have a few advisors that do have previously disclosed disciplinary or legal history on their Form U4. Again, this question piggybacks on the disclosure section on item 4 of the Form CRS. Now, nearly all of our advisory personnel can state no to this question and link to the SEC's public disclosure page where a prospect or client can look up your advisory background and any possible disciplinary history. The last conversation starter asks, who is my primary contact person? Is he or she a representative of an investment advisor or a broker-dealer? And Who can I talk to if I have concerns about how this person is treating me? In this response, we stress our team-based approach, which allows a prospect or a client to better understand the depth and breadth we bring to the table as a Buckingham advisor. Now, I know multiple teams who have a team contact sheet, which would be a perfect thing to share in a response to this type of question. It's also important to note and clarify that all of our advisory personnel are investment advisor representatives. If a client has a concern about how they are being treated, we recommend providing the name of your advisory team leader.
Our final section that we will be covering is the Form CRS delivery requirements. What is unique about Form CRS is that it will need to be delivered more frequently than other disclosure documents like the ADV Part 1 or Part 2. Here are the main triggering events when Form CRS will need to be delivered. Before or at the time you enter into an investment advisory contract with a retail investor, within 30 days of a client's request to receive Form CRS, anytime the firm opens a new account that is different from the client's existing accounts, when the firm recommends that the client roll over assets from a retirement account, including a 401k plan, into a new or existing account or investment. And lastly, when the firm recommends or provides a new investment advisory service or investment that does not necessarily involve the opening of a new account and would not be held in an existing account. Remember again that this only impacts retail investors. You may be thinking, how am I as an advisor going to ensure that I remember all of these delivery requirements? Well, our compliance team, in conjunction with a number of other internal resources, has built out workflows and cases within Salesforce and Agreement Express to address each triggering event. The client service team will be able to handle the majority of this responsibility. The first delivery of this document will be in late July, so please be aware that clients will be receiving the document in the next few weeks during certain points throughout their time as a client.
Thanks, Amanda. As we wrap up, here are some final reminders to keep in mind. The Form CRS document will be filed with the SEC before June 30th. We will then deliver a copy of that Form CRS document to each advisory client at some point in July. The Form CRS document will be emailed or uploaded to the client's portal if they have opted into e-consent of documents through their investment advisory agreement. Otherwise, it will be physically mailed to clients. On an ongoing basis, the document will need to be delivered based on certain triggering events that Amanda went over. There will be resources on the Form CRS available on our public website and internally for advisors to use on the beat. Finally, if you have any questions, please reach out to our compliance team at compliance@buckinghamgroup.com. Thank you.